What's up, Daywalkers and Night Stalkers? It's me, your twisted Southern Horror Queen, coming to you live from under full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. I'm glad to have all you creepy kids joining in tonight, because as usual, I got all kind of crazy, twisted little tales to spin for you guys. Yeah, we don't talk politics or religion or unicorns or fairies here on the stream, y'all. It's all creepy all the time, right? Of course. That's why you're here. You already knew that, right? So, yeah, what else would you expect from your friendly neighborhood creepy chick? That's me. Oh, I see Big Johnny Blender's already in the house. He's been inside for a few hours now. Said he's been being tormented by the dogs today. So, before we get rolling, and I got to give my shout outs to the Adrian's Fury Dragster sponsors. So, here is a big, wet, creepy chick kiss coming at you. Renegade Racing Fuel, Amalay Oil, RacersDirect.net, Mike Cigars, Prelude, D&M Graphics, Surreal Studios. And y'all already knew this one, because this is my favorite one. Naked Wands, of course, right? Got to get a little bit of that going on right now. Real quick, y'all just give me a second. Yeah, that's good stuff right there. All right, so also got to give another shout out tonight before we get rolling to Pandora's Box Publishing. Another huge shout out for all the stuff you've been doing to help me revamp the Adrian Trilogy series. Volume 1, which is Soulmate, is out now. It's available online at all major book retailers. That includes Amazon, Books A Million, all those crazy places. There's my boy Freddie Roseman. How you doing, sweetness? Hoping to see you soon. I'm having Freddie DTs. I hope it's all going good for you, baby. All right, so like I said, Soulmate is available. Fury will be available here real shortly. We got all the covers taken care of. All the insides are taken care of. So it's just a matter of putting pieces, parts together. And it's all good after that, right? Of course it is. These little books right here are full of history and legends and blood and guts and a shit ton of vampire erotica. And if you don't know what vampire erotica is, you really need these books, dude. All right, so with all the shout outs being caught up, you guys know what it's time to do now, right? Yeah, it is time to dim the lights and kick out the kids and lock the doors, because you don't want the little bastards to get back in. And then go grab your own tasty adult beverage, because we're about to get our scary on. Freddie says, I'm hoping to get a table at Gulf Coast Fan Fest with Ash. That would be freaking fantastic. But other than that, I am okay. Hope you are well. I'm old and mean, and I don't aspire to change ever. There is my boy Lawrence Bim. He's hanging at the Crescent City tonight, where there's a whole lot of vampires and haunted legend going down. I bet Lawrence could tell us all about it. He could probably hook me up with a few tales that I don't even know about. Lawrence is a creepy kid just like me. I love him. He's got a place in my dark little heart. Okay, so tonight we're pretty much just going to hang out in Alabama because our friend Todd Anderson of Progressively Paranormal, which I don't see on the feed yet tonight. I'll have to spank him later. It means I have to take the whip off the wall for you, Todd. But anyway, we are spending the night in Alabama because he said he wanted to hear what I would come up with, some haunted locations in his neck of the woods. So, Todd, even though you're not here right now, and we're off. All right, so first up is this creepy little cemetery that was founded in 1822. It's called Maple Hill, but you're not going to recognize that name. Anyway, Maple Hill is the oldest and the largest boneyard in Alabama, and it has been for quite a while now. But this sucker's like 100 acres, and that's a whole lot of dead folks, y'all. But this little graveyard has a really unique feature that you don't see every day. It's tucked away in a little cove that's surrounded by a rock cliff on 3 sides, and that's where there's a whole bunch of little paths that lead out in the woods. And yeah, you're going to know this name. It's called the Dead Children's Playground. Now, during the day, you know, it's just a cheerful little spot that just happens to be in the middle of a graveyard, but when the sun goes down, things start to change a little bit. what looks like this little roadside kiddie park turns into something a little more on the creepy side. That's where we like to hang out, right? Because that's where the ghost kids come out to play. So why the hell would you put a playground in the middle of a graveyard anyway to begin with, right? Well, legend has it that back in the 1960s, there was a whole bunch of child abductions that went down in this area. And unfortunately, the mutilated bodies of these missing kids were found in the same area where the playground stands today. And many of their remains were also interred in this graveyard. So it kind of gives it a reason to have these ghost kids hanging around, right? Well, since the playground was put there, there have been reports of swings that move around on their own, children yelling and giggling, and when photos are taken, a lot of the times orbs of light show up in these photos. And hey, Teresa, glad to see you back. And there's Uncle Jesse. What's going on? I'm talking about Alabama tonight. You need to be tuning in, Jesse. And there is my Uncle DW and my Aunt Wanda tuning in from Carrier, Mississippi. Glad to see you guys hanging with me tonight. So, like I said, besides these orbs that are typically about the height or seen at about the height of where a child would be, people have been reporting the sounds of children yelling and giggling, you know, kids playing around, and all kind of other crazy little things going on in this cemetery. Now, most of the activity seems to be happening between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. and that, of course, is way too late for any kid with a pulse to be outside playing, right? Especially in Louisiana. They get their ass tore by mosquitoes around that time. But those are the witching hours, and of course, that is the perfect time for ghosts to come out and play. So, like I said, the most frequently reported phenomenon in this little graveyard is the common occurrence of these swings moving by themselves. So that could just be the wind, right? Not really, not so much. These folks that have witnessed this going on say that a lot of the times these swings will come to a sudden stop all by themselves. And some folks say that they've even seen dust rising up from the ground underneath the swings, just like somebody's dragging their feet, or maybe they just jumped off a second ago. So other people who have taken pictures there, they, like I said, pretty common for these orbs of light or bright, misty figures to show up in these photographs, which are all said to be about the same size as a kid. So check this out, y'all. In the fall of 2007, the city of Huntsville tried to pull a fast one, but it didn't work out real good for them. These guys tried to take the playground out to make room for more grave sites. And they tried to pull this little stunt in the middle of the night so nobody'd get pissed off. Like I said, didn't work out for them so well. So one day the playground's there, everything's cool, and the next day the equipment's gone and the whole area right there is just destroyed. Well, the freaking locals were pissed. And they raised so much hell that the city had to pull the work order for the cemetery and start installing new playground equipment. That's right. Us Southerners embrace our ghosts, especially the young ones. So this attempt by the city was pretty much a massive failure. And in the meanwhile, none of this paranormal activity skipped a beat. If anything, it's even more frequent and more intense these days. I'm thinking that the little ghost kids are enjoying that new playground equipment, right, y'all? Anyway, in January of 2008, the Alabama Paranormal Society did an investigation there. And one of the team members said that they heard the voice of either a woman or a small child. Hey, Anthony, glad to see you hopping on board tonight. You getting your scary on, huh, dude? Cool. All right, so they quickly turned around and snapped a picture from the area where that voice came from. And when that photograph was developed, this person was freaking ecstatic to see that they had captured the misty figure of a woman. Now, it's not unusual for folks to find orbs in their pictures, and a lot of people say that this chick actually lucked out that night. But besides the common appearance of orbs, folks report seeing these misty figures of children in and around the playground, which of course are accompanied by the sounds of them laughing and playing and cutting up. And if you're really lucky, sometimes a few folks have reported actually hearing the voice of a child calling out to them and inviting them to come and play with them. That's pretty awesome. Kind of puts me in the mind of Stephen King and, oh, actually, Pet Sematary, the little dude Gage, come play with me. Nobody wanted to play with Gage. Anyway, besides the Dead Children's Playground, Alabama is filled up with places that have a very long history of being haunted. There's like restaurants and hotels and bridges and roads. And for now, also courtesy of Todd Anderson, we're going to talk about one road in particular. Now, it's pretty cool. When he hooked me up with this information and gave me the road's name, I never heard of it. And being that I'm from down here in the South, there's very few legends that I hadn't at least heard of before. I might not know everything about them, but this one, nothing. So you guys check this out. It's pretty cool. It's a little difficult getting a whole lot of information, but what I did find was freaking awesome. All right, so Jack Cole Road can be found just off of Highway 7. It's in Hayden, Alabama. And the locals are going to tell you that over the years, it's gained a pretty wicked reputation of being one of Alabama's most haunted roads. And there's pretty good reason why. Actually, there's a lot of good reasons why, like at least 70. See, back in 1890, way back in the day, there was this old hospital that was on Jack Cole Road. Now, of course, folks always die in hospitals, right? Well, in 1900, a whole lot of people died in this hospital. In fact, it was around 60. And no, it wasn't some mass bombing or cult suicide attempt or anything like that. It was actually a cholera outbreak that took these folks out. And now they, along with several other folks who have had rather unfortunate and untimely deaths along Jack Cole Road, are hanging out there today. Hey, Cassandra, glad to see you. That's another pretty girl right there. So anyway, there's been a whole lot of reports of folks driving along and looking up to see these shadow people walking around out in the woods alongside this little roadway. And then some folks have even reported seeing some kind of Bigfoot-like critter running around in the woods there too. This gets pretty cool a little bit later on. Actually, you know, we talked about the Honey Island swamp monster in Pearl River, Louisiana, which I grew up with that legend. That was a couple of weeks ago. And during that show, David Childers of Mississippi Paranormal Research Institution sent me some information on another Sasquatch-type little critter that's been spotted in Vicksburg. And now here's another one in Alabama. These little suckers just keep popping up everywhere, right? Now, some folks have claimed to have seen this beast hanging around Ponchatoula, Louisiana as well, but I've pretty much debunked that one. Those were just encounters with my sister-in-law, so there's no cause for alarm out there, folks. Y'all can leave your kids and small animals outside. It's all good, I think. Andrew Armstrong is jumping in tonight. It's been a while since I've seen you live and in person. It's good to have you back, Andrew. We've been missing you. Teresa said, is this the same road that has the phantom truck? Teresa is familiar with the urban legend and the haunted history. Absolutely is, Teresa. Check this out. It's crazy, right? So anyway, one day these hunters were out, and they were kind of on a dual-purpose mission. They were either going to run across some prey and have something for dinner, or they were going to run across this Bigfoot dude. Well, actually, they wound up running across something way different than that, and it was way more than they bargained for, too. So they're out in the middle of East Jesus when they stumble up on this dilapidated old wood cabin, and inside they find the mummified remains of this woman. Yeah, it was on then. Everything started to make sense to the locals then, and the rumors started spreading that there had been some kind of witch in this cabin, and that it was her that had been responsible for all this madness that had been going on down that little road. And some folks even thought that the Bigfoot dude was either her pet or something she'd conjured up from hell to come and protect her and her property. And it may actually been onto something there, because there is a ton of madness that goes on down and around this little stretch of roadway. And most of it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Hey, Jody, glad to see you joining us. So after that, it didn't take very long before a few of these rambunctious locals took to the woods, and they burned that little cabin down to the ground. They thought that they were putting an end to all the bad stuff that was happening there. Not so much, because the madness did not stop. So during the 1960s, a fruit farmer was found deader than hell at the end of Jack Cole Road. Somebody hacked his ass up with an axe. Nobody knows who did it, and they did it one time, think that they knew who did it, and they arrested this one poor bastard, and he wound up being put to death for it before they figured out that there was no way it could have actually been him that axed the murderer or axed the farmer. Tragic. Anyway, if you ask me, somebody that gets hacked to death with an axe did something that really, really pissed somebody off. I want you to think about this. You got to be really angry or really tripping to hack somebody up with an axe. Now, back in the day, in the 60s, meth wasn't even a thing back then, but acid and LSD were, so there is that. But I got to tell you, from my point of view, and I really don't know a whole lot about this farmer's story, but I got to say a pissed off woman might be the one that was responsible for that. So maybe Big Johnny Blender needs to keep that in mind. So besides the farmer, this other dude that lived off of Jack Cole Road hung himself. Now, he'd been telling his friends that there was some really screwed up stuff going on in his house, and he was freaking terrified. And a few days later, they find his ass at the end of a rope. So sounds like this dude was probably being afflicted by some malevolent spirit that was hanging out there on Jack Cole Road. But that had to be a pretty aggressive spirit for him to kill himself. Let that sink in right there, folks. And then there was another murder that went down on Jack Cole Road. Now, I didn't read the whole court transcript because it was rather lengthy, and I don't have the attention span for that. But what I did gather out of the deal, this dude actually wound up shooting this chick in the head 3 times, and her corpse was found down in face down in a puddle by a couple of little girls that lived right there in the area. So the top half of the body was clothed, the bottom half was not, and there's that too. The victim actually knew her murderer, and they were neighbors at some point, which is also freaking tragic. Needless to say, they convicted this jerk for murder in the 1st degree, and he was sentenced to life in jail. I did also find that this douche nozzle appealed his case, but I couldn't find any evidence that that actually did him any good. So let's hope he's rotting his ass off in jail, and he's Bubba's bitch right now. Anyway, then here, a little bit more recently, in 2015, this 52-year-old disabled woman named Lisa Weaver was reported missing by her son. This is kind of crazy, too. So he texted her at 2:37 on the evening of, or afternoon of February the 5th to tell her that he was on his way home. Well, a few minutes after that, while he's on his way home, a neighbor texts him and tells him that his house is on fire. Well, the house burned to the ground. Now, the bodies of the family dogs were recovered, or the remains of the family dogs were recovered, but Lisa's body was never found there. After several investigations and several searches, not one sign of Lisa was recovered in this house. Now, the chick was on oxygen, which could explain the house catching fire, but it would have been absolutely impossible for her in her physical condition to have gotten out of this house by herself. And to me, if the remains of the family dog were found, that would just logically imply that something would have been found with Lisa, some bone fragments, something. So what happened to Lisa? Still nobody knows. But I'd venture that her spirit is probably one of many that you'd encounter here on Jack Cole Road. And then, oh, actually, Teresa, no, it's a different legend, but I do, stay tuned. It is coming up, the one with the Phantom driver. I got a little bit ahead of myself. So another haunted joint that was recommended by Todd Anderson, the Jemison Center, or what they call the old Bryce Hospital, which is in, or was in, or pieces parts are probably still in North Part, Alabama. So this little paranormal gem is packed with all kind of creepy activity. And maybe because back in the day it was used as a nut house. And we all know what went down in those back in the day nut houses, don't we? Yeah, and this one had all of that. So today there's ongoing reports of hot and cold spots, voices and footsteps, screams and moans, doors opening and closing, lights going off and on. And yeah, did I mention there's no electricity there for the lights to be going off and on? But they do anyway. And there's also no working phone lines in this joint. But again, that does not stop the sound of ringing phones from time to time. So really a whole lot of residual madness going on in here. So I started looking into the history of this place, and I found that there was just as much craziness going on before the hospital was ever built. But I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the Nut House, and then I'll wind the clock back and tell you about what I found before Bryce even became a thing. So before the Civil War, the Gibson family settled in around Tuscaloosa. And that family wasn't very long before they wound up being one of Alabama's most successful and wealthiest families. Now, the old man, Robert Gibson Jr., he was a fairly shrewd businessman. And he actually wound up owning like 6 plantations, which were staffed by hundreds of slaves, which he, of course, owned them as well. He owned foundries and mills and toll roads and coal mines. And back in the Civil War, Robert's brother, Mims Jemison, was killed in battle. Now, his family gave his farm and his land to the state of Alabama to build that asylum for the mentally ill. Now, in 1861, the Alabama State Hospital for the Insane was opened, and the first superintendent was Peter Bryce, who'd been practicing psychology for about 27 years at that point, and obviously he's the namesake of the hospital. Well, the asylum was built to house like 268 patients. Then there was the additional facility which held another 100 beds for old folks, and that was called the Mary Stark Harper Geriatric Hospital, which is now on the campus at University of Alabama. You betcha there's some crazy shit going on in there too, y'all. So this joint starts off as a place to house these mentally ill and physically handicapped boys, right? And of course, in the beginning, it's all good. There was this bakery and a laundromat and a warehouse and a garden and a dairy. And of course, all the patients worked there and they learned how to do things with their hands. And of course, they supported themselves that way. There was even a woodworking class there, and one of the main products that these patients made were freaking coffins. That's fantastic, right? So with all the stuff that was going on here, the facility was pretty much self-sufficient, and patients were all happy, and they were all well taken care of. And as all these places always start out with these good intentions, like teaching skills and arts and crafts to the mentally challenged, it just never really works out that way. And of course, things pretty much went downhill from there. Well, these rumors start circulating that there's some pretty inhumane shit going down here at Bryce. And in 1967, those rumors hit the ears of Lurleen Wallace, who was the governor's wife at that time. So she goes down there to check things out. And of course, she was none too happy with the things that she found there. So since Bryce had been doing so well on its own, of course, the state had to step in and screw everything up, right? There were budget cuts, and of course, that caused them to have to fire like 100 of the staff, and they were cutting funds for food and supplies and meds and arts and crafts. Yeah, you could pretty much forget that shit right there. That was gone and over with. These poor patients were laying around halfway clothed. They were sleeping on urine-soaked floors. The few mattresses that there were there in this joint were filthier than the floors. The staff, of course, was less than first rate. They were stressed out, and a lot of these staff members were, of course, physically and sexually abusing these patients, and that's when they were paid attention to at all. Abuse and neglect just became the common treatment for trying to make these patients more manageable back in the day. And things were so bad there on all levels that the hospital was described to be more like a Nazi concentration camp than a facility to treat the mentally challenged. So, in 1976, the S.D. Allen Intermediate Care Facility was built to take on all the overflow of the old folks from Bryce. And the same property was already occupied by a facility that was owned by Bryce Asylum for black patients, which that was going on during the segregation era. Now, this today is what they call Old Bryce. See, after the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of these freed black men and women couldn't find work, and times were pretty rough back then. So a lot of them stayed on and lived at the old Bryce facility, even though they weren't crazy. They stayed there and they worked and helped with the facilities and helped on the farms and in other departments in exchange for room and board. Hey, Star, glad to see you joining us tonight, sweetie. So by the time the S.D. Allen facility closed in 2003 and old Bryce was abandoned and crumbling, the reports of these ghost stories and paranormal phenomena from all the facilities had started way before that. There's this one really crazy tale that surfaced in 2014 that came from the Sun and from both a Baptist preacher. You guys check this out. This is so freaking crazy. So this preacher's son worked at a funeral home. It was the same funeral home that was contracted to pick up the dead folks from all of these Bryce facilities. So he shows up at Bryce and he's there to retrieve a body and prep it for burial. Well, when he gets there, he meets up with this orderly, which is supposed to lead him to the room where the corpse is at. Now, the orderly tells him that in the hallway that he's going to have to walk down to get to this body, that there's a room that he needs to stay the hell away from. Well, this dude's made several trips to Bryce to pick up bodies, and he's never been told anything like that before, so he got to ask why, right? So he asks what's up with this room. Well, the orderly proceeded to tell him that the woman that was in the room was possessed. So they start down this hallway, and all of a sudden he starts hearing these groans and animal sounds echoing down the hall, and of course, the closer they get to the room, the louder the noises get, right? Well, they get right up on the room, and there's no doubt that all these weird, wild-ass noises are coming from behind that door. So the little door's got a very tiny window on it. There's no other windows in the hallway, no other way to see in the room. So what do you think this idiot does? He walks up to the door, and he starts peeking through the window of the door to the room that he was told to stay the hell away from because the chick that's inside of it's possessed. Yeah, he didn't. So he almost wet his pants over what he saw in there. He looks in, and this chick's running laps around the room. Fine, right? No, not really, because this chick's feet are not on the floor. They're about 2 feet up the wall, and she's running horizontally around the room on the wall. Yeah, it's Captain Howdy time, y'all. So, needless to say, this dude is freaking the hell out. So he goes to close his eyes and shake it off and walk away, but it was too late because this chick done locked eyes with him, and she flings herself against the door to be face to face with him. So he says that she was covered in these strange markings and scars, and she was very pale and gaunt, of course. Well, this dude is frozen in place. And all of a sudden, this thing speaks to him. She says, I know you. I know your father as well. Then she starts naming off other members of his family just to prove a point. So in the middle of all this, this orderly realizes that the dude is not beside him. And he turns around and he sees him staring into the window of the room that he's been told to stay the hell away from because the chick that's in it's possessed, but he didn't. And he hollers for him, and he breaks the dude's frozen stance away from this door. Well, the chick starts convulsing and contorting like Sigourney Weaver's aliens fixing to pop out of her. So the dude starts screaming for help. Well, the orderly that had been showing him the way to the corpse, plus 3 more come rushing down the hallway. They move the dude out of the way, and they fly into the cell and try to start restraining this chick to keep her from hurting herself. Well, this chick, which is probably about my size, starts throwing these grown men around the cell like rag dolls. Now, eventually, they do get her locked down and sedated, and the dude goes on to pick up this dead body. Several years went by before he would ever talk about it. And, of course, the first person he did talk to about it was his father, the preacher. And his father, being a man of God and great faith, told him that there are just some forces in this world that are not meant to be here, and no man should ever constitute the evils of the universe. You know, that's basically good advice, with the exception of what the hell do you do when that evil force has painted a target on your ass? You're gonna have to deal with it at some point and some way. So there's still a lot of paranormal activity that's going on in these facilities. And even though they're not all in exactly the same spot, they're in the same general area. The SD Allen Nursing Home is crumbling, but that doesn't keep the ghost hunters from checking it out. It's actually supposed to be condemned, but folks are still going in there. Think the risk is worth it? I guess it depends on how you look at things. Maybe a lot of these folks have investigated this nursing home. Now, most of them say that it's pretty common when you go in there that you can smell blood and antiseptic. This place has been emptied, fallen apart, decrepit, funky for decades, but still to be able to smell blood and antiseptic, that's pretty wild. Consider what is antiseptic. It's alcohol, basically. What happens to alcohol? It evaporates. Which, speaking of that, my alcohol is evaporating. I have to put a stop to that right quick. So, some folks have also ventured in this place, and they've come out with scratches on them. Of course, these unseen hands have also afflicted them in other ways, but the scratches are physical evidence that there's been plenty of documentation throughout the years with. Also, like I said earlier, there's no power that's connected to this building, but still it is not uncommon to hear the sound of these doctors being paged over the intercom, and of course lights flickering in these long since abandoned rooms. So how do you explain that madness, right? So at Old Bryce, there's a common story about a ghost of a little boy. Now, nobody knows this kid's name, but a lot of folks can tell you how he came to be there. Now, according to local legend, this kid was a patient there at Bryce back in the day, and he was supposed to be subjected to hydrotherapy to treat his hyperactivity. Well, the routine treatment required this kid to be submerged into freezing water for several minutes. Needless to say, this kid wasn't having it, so he starts fighting with the nurses. Well, one of the nurses got fed the hell up with him and starts holding his head under the freezing cold water, and she wound up drowning the poor little kid. But nowadays, he's seen pretty often on the upper levels of this building. And folks say he looks to be about 7 or 8 years old, and he's got sandy blonde hair, and he's wearing pants with suspenders and a short coat. A lot of the folks that visit there say that they leave these little toys there for him where they see him most often. And when they go back to see if the toys are still there, they're always thrilled to report that they are not. So there's a little on Bryce Hospital and the other affiliated institution. So let's get back to what was going on with the Jemison family. And we're going to kick that off with the Jemison Van de Graaff Mansion. Now, this estate was built between 1859 and 1862. Robert Jemison spared no expense. He was on a mission to build the most modern and the most luxurious house in the area. And what he wound up with was what they call the modern marvel of the times. Now, this house had running water and flushing toilets, imagine that, coal gas-powered lighting, and a gas stove. And there was more planning underway to add or create the most modern amenities, but the booming economy, of course, came to a sudden halt when these rumors of secession and war began circulating. Yeah, there came the Civil War, right? So that completely screwed the plans for adding the elaborate central heating plant to this grand conservatory that he was building. Now, I don't want to make this man sound like he was some wealthy dude that never knew the struggle like we do, right? That's not the case. This dude pretty much started out with nothing, and he worked his way up. He owned several successful businesses in many different fields, and even though he was filthy rich, he always gave back to the community. He was always there to help people. So he was so well respected that back in the 1830s, he actually decided he was going to run for office, and he wound up being elected to the Alabama House of Representatives, which just started his legacy as a skilled politician. However, like I was saying, here came the Civil War. So all it went into, pretty much just went to hell in a handbasket, everything he was doing. So I guess you could always say he was lucky to still have his home and his health. And I do mean lucky. So Alabama is now involved in the Civil War. It's August of 1864, and Admiral David G. Farragut gave the famous command, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," during what would become known as the Battle of Mobile Bay. Hey, Wayla, still waiting to hear back from that company. I'll let you know something, honey. So directly after that, the Union Army was on the way. Mobile fell, and it was only a matter of time before Tuscaloosa would be invaded as well. Well, the Union's feet hit the ground in April of 1865, and they came with a vengeance. Hey, Dale, glad to see you. There's a homeboy from Pearl River County right there joining us. So they pretty much burned down everything they laid their eyes on. They were robbing, raping, and pillaging anything or anybody that they came across. So at that point in time, when they'd pretty much done everything in, they decided they were going to try and hunt down the one last thorn that was in their side. And of course, that thorn was Robert Jemison. So Jemison catches wind that the Union authorities were coming for his ass, so he hauls ass into the swamps around his property. Well, the Union soldiers searched high and low for him, but they never found him. So now they're really pissed off, right? So they start making their way to his homestead to burn it to the ground. Well, Jemison was pretty well loved by the community, and when some of the little local boys saw what was fixing to go down, they concocted a plan. So the Union soldiers are standing outside of his house with torches, and they tell his wife she's got 15 minutes to get her shit and get out. Well, these local boys jump on their horse, and they start riding up and down the road screaming, "Forrest is coming! Forrest is coming!" Well, these pissed off, muddy, tired, mosquito-bitten, red-bug-infested Union soldiers don't want no part of Confederate cavalry commander Forrest. So they hop on their horses, and they get the hell out of there real quick, fast, and in a hurry. These little kids right here were heroes. They saved the Jemison mansion, but not much could be said for his other ventures. But it was all good because Jemison was a Southern boy, and us Southerners, we don't go down without a fight. Hey, Joe, glad to see you joining me tonight, honey. Been missing you too. So by October 1871, Jemison had to reestablish himself. And he had survived the tragedy of Civil War, but tragedy, as it does, soon struck him and his family again. On December 5th, 1865, Jemison's daughter Cherokee marries this young lawyer named Andrew Hargrove. You guys should recognize that name. Now, Jemison had blessed the marriage, even though Hargrove had lost pretty much all of his estate during the war. He'd only just started practicing law when the war broke out. Well, Hargrove immediately dropped the law gig, and he joined up with the Confederate Army because that was the right thing to do back in the day. So for the first few years, he was lucky, but in the summer of 1864, he gets hit in the head by a Union bullet. Now, this bullet cut a long gash across his forehead, and it left a big blue scar there. But he was still pretty lucky, right? Well, in 1865, Hargrove gets hit by a mighty ball. I'm not real sure what they call that, but it's another kind of bullet. I assume it's a little bit bigger. And that one hit him right above his ear. Now, of course, that was a little bit more serious than the first one because that bullet lodged in his brain, and the surgeons knew that if they tried to take it out, they were going to kill him. So they pretty much sewed him up, wrapped him up, and sent him on his way. Hey, Susie, glad to see you, sweetheart. I miss you. So for the next 30 years of his life, this dude Robert walks around with this bullet in his brain. And, of course, he's suffering with these excruciating headaches every freaking day, but he managed to work through the pain, and he did wind up becoming a very prominent lawyer and statesman. Now, after his career as state senator played out, he taught at the University of Alabama as a law professor. But eventually, that pain got to be way too much for him. And on the evening of December 6, 1895, which was 30 years and 1 day after he had married Cherokee, he walked into his library and put a final bullet in his skull. Now, Cherokee never got over that suicide, so she sinks into this consuming depression, which evolved into a cloud of dementia and madness. And on an afternoon in 1904, she went to join him. So when she died, the mansion was passed on to the Jemison heirs, and for a period after that, it began falling into disrepair. Now, at that point, the mansion was fixed up, and it was used as a Tuscaloosa library for a while, And then it became the headquarters of Antique Monthly and Horizon magazines. The house is now under the ownership of the Jemison Van de Graaff Mansion Foundation. So, even though nobody's living there, that doesn't mean that nobody's home, right? In fact, it's very seldom that somebody visits and does not have some kind of encounter or paranormal experience there. One of the most frequently seen apparitions there is of this little girl that hangs out around the staircase. Now, she's been spotted, she's been photographed, she's been recorded, and from time to time, she actually leaves her little handprint. Hey, MJ, glad to see you. On a mirror that is in a room that's blocked off from the public, so nobody else you can blame that on. Now, there's no record of any kid having died there, especially during the Jemison's rule. But when the mansion was in disrepair and times were really hard, the property was sold and it was converted into a low-income apartment building. And that was in the 1930s. So for the next 10 years or so, this joint was home to 13 families that shared its one bathtub and 2 toilets. Not happening here, never. So it wasn't long before that fantastic mansion that used to be evolved into this den of squalor and disease and just plain out funk, y'all. So some folks think that it could have been during this era when the little girl came into the picture. But this little girl's not alone there. There's a whole lot of people that hear phantom music and the sound of heavy footsteps and even the sound of this massive crash that never leaves any sign of carnage. It's been investigated time after time after time, but nobody can ever figure out what it is that's caused this noise, and there's no sign of any kind of damage during the investigations. So there's a story about this one bride in particular that bought a wedding package there, and she actually got a little lanyard with her deal. So she's in one of these upstairs rooms, and she's getting ready to walk down the aisle, and suddenly the mirror that she's looking into comes loose from the wall and flies across the room. Now, I'm thinking that could have been an omen, and I'm actually wondering if she went through the ceremony. I think I would have to think long and hard about that. Now, in one paranormal investigation, the team had set up in this room is the same room where Hargrove shot himself in the head. So they got all their equipment set up, and they go and close all the windows and all the doors, make sure nothing gets disturbed. And once everything's ready, one of these team members starts trying to build dialogue with somebody or something that could be there. And he asks for somebody or something to give them a sign if they're there. So at that very moment, one of the doors that they had just closed and secured flies open. So, dude, I'd say here's your sign. All right, so another big shout out to Todd with Progressive Paranormal for turning us on to these crazy haunted spots in Alabama. But I gotta say, I ran across a ton of haunted locations and urban legends in Alabama, and one of them had a whole lot of crazy stuff going on. Teresa, this is the one you were talking about earlier. It's the same one I thought was the earlier story, but we were both mistaken because we as women are never wrong. So somewhere deep in the woods around Butler and Covington County line, there used to be this little chapel that was called Consolation Church. And today there's pieces, parts left of it. You can still visit. But in 2015, the building was damn near burned to the ground. Now, a lot of the locals suspect vandals, but other folks say that it was some satanic cult ritual that went awry. But over the years, this spot has earned one hell of a haunted reputation. There's legends of banshees and hellhounds and ghost riders, and even a haunted outhouse attached to the church and grounds there. So one of the most common stories associated with this church is in reference to this Gaelic banshee. Now, folks say they've heard this sucker shrieking while they're inside the church, and those same folks are convinced that once you hear that banshee shrill screech, it's an omen that somebody inside that church is fixing to bite it. Other folks that have heard the sounds of sobbing and whispering coming from within the walls themselves, and they think that it's possibly the spirits of those the banshee has come and claimed in the past. Now, another legend that claims that there are vicious hellhounds that roam around the cemetery at night. They're said to appear as these massive, evil-looking dogs with big, glowing red eyes. Locals tend to believe that they were summoned by some of the Satanists that held their rituals there once the church was abandoned. Scratched into the wood floor, I've seen pictures of this before the church actually burned, there was a pentagram, and a lot of the locals would go and just check on the little place to make sure it hadn't been vandalized or whatever, and it was quite frequent where they found animal pieces, parts, and partially burned candles, and whatever gear it is that Satanists use to do their little parties with. So very true and very possible that that could be the case with these hellhounds. But the Banshee, the hellhounds, there are also Confederate soldiers that are buried in these graves, and some of these graves date back to the 1800s. They say that upon occasion, the Confederates will rise, and once you're outside and in or near the cemetery, you can hear them marching around the church and through the cemetery grounds. Now, besides the Banshee, the hellhounds, and the Confederate soldiers, there are other forms of paranormal activity that are rumored to haunt this little spot. There are also claims that there are spirits of two children that are seen there occasionally. Now, one of them is a little boy, and he's seen there frequently, and he's usually playing with the ball. Now, sometimes he'll materialize for these visitors to see, but most of the time you just hear him or maybe catch a glimpse of an orb or something when you can hear him giggling. But there's a legend among the locals that say if this boy materializes and he rolls the ball to you, and you take the ball and you roll it back to him, you're going to drop dead, quick, fast, and in a hurry. So if you're in the area and you see a little boy playing with a ball, not his balls, a ball, leave him the hell alone. Let him play with his ball. You don't need to participate. So the little girl that's seen there, she's only seen briefly and from time to time, not as regular. And she's not inside the church. She's typically seen skipping down the road, and she only remains visible for spurts, a few seconds here, a few seconds there, and then she's gone. Now, there's another legend that's associated with the church that has to do with Teresa, a black 1964 Ford pickup truck, and the ghost driver. So the locals say if you're hanging around this church and you've been there too long, or you've got ill intent in your mind while you're hanging around these grounds, that sometimes when the moon is full, this black Ford truck will show up and chase your ass away. And if that truck starts chasing you, you better haul ass, because if it catches up to you, it's said that that ghost driver will force you off the road and cause you to wreck. And in many cases, the people who go through those wrecks do not survive the crash. And as if that's not enough, there is one other haunted legend that goes down here, and it has to do with the haunted little outhouse that's behind the church. Legends say that if you go down there and you go inside the little haunted outhouse to handle your business, that the door will slam shut and lock behind you, and you're stuck in there until somebody outside comes along and finds you and lets you out. So I would recommend finding a rather large tree just in case. All right, one more haunted spot in Alabama for the evening, and that is the Sweetwater Plantation, which is in Florence. So this 180-year-old plantation used to cover about 3,800 acres, and it was named for the creek that runs behind the mansion. Now, this place was designed by General John Brahan, was in the Alabama militia during the War of 1812. Now, he starts building it, but it wound up being completed by his son-in-law, Robert Patton, who at some point was the governor after the Civil War. Now, even though this place was mostly occupied as a family residence, it was used for other things from time to time. And as a matter of fact, during the Civil War, the basement was used as a hospital. How often do we see that happen? And we know exactly what kind of madness that leaves behind. It was also used as the first jail in Lauderdale County. So with those two lovely little factors, Lemming, there's no doubt why folks claim this place is haunted, right? So, Sweetwater Mansion has been investigated many, many times, and professional opinions seem to vary on how many ghosted it is that they think are there. There is my baby, Edmund Charles Barrett. I'm glad to see you, sweetheart. How's the new house? Hope everything is wonderful. I miss you. I love you. Can't wait to see you here in a couple of weeks. So, been investigated several times. Like I said, opinions vary on how many ghosts are still hanging out there. Now, this house itself has got some really creepy little quirks. There's this one room in particular that for some reason, if a woman walks inside, the door is going to slam shut and lock behind her. And again, just like the outhouse at the Consolation Church, somebody's got to come let you the hell out because you're not getting out by yourself. Now, the last caretaker that lived there was a woman, and she lived there to the end of her days, and the bulk of the end of her days, she was pretty much terrified. There were so many things going on in this joint that at one time she tried nailing the door shut in an attempt to block all the paranormal activity. I'm thinking that probably didn't work for her. But before she passed away in 2004, she resorted to living in only 2 rooms of this mansion. Now, one of the most harrowing things that she saw there, along with many others who have reported seeing the same image, was the image of a coffin in the right front parlor, and inside that coffin was a dude that was dressed in a Confederate uniform, and he had a big ass bullet hole in his head. So no doubt he was deader than shit. So come to find out, Robert Patton's son Billy was shot in the head while he was fighting in the Battle of Shiloh. And that room where this coffin image is seen, not only by the caretaker but by others, as I've said, just happens to be the same room where the wake was held for this dude. Robert also lost another son in the battle during the Civil War, and it's believed that the bodies of both of these brothers are in what is called the secret room, which is inside the house. That's what you heard. Ed's new house is haunted by Mexican strippers. Well, Ed should charge a cover at the door then. Okay. So this little room was built onto the house after the house was established, and it has no door. All it has is a tiny little window, which will allow you to look inside, but you really can't see that well. To the left of the window appears to be the crumbling remnants of these wooden coffins, but the legends actually say that the soldiers/brothers are buried under the floor there in that room. So if that is the case, then who, if anybody, is in those remnants of those coffins? Curious, I'd like to know. Now, plenty of activity has been documented by paranormal investigators there, and these folks have captured all kinds of madness and photographs, stuff like the figure of this Confederate soldier, a couple of child ghosts, and there's further documentation of these doors opening and closing, and heavy footsteps, faucets turning off and on, and lights turning off and on. And during one investigation, this team saw a board slide across the floor, which was followed by the sound of a body falling to the floor. During the same investigation, a ceiling tile fell and then flung itself across the room. Well, besides all that madness, some folks have heard the sound of a piano being played, which is coming from the front parlor where the former governor used to entertain his visitors. So it sounds like a pretty cool place to visit if you find yourself hanging out in Alabama sometime in the near future. Again, I would like to, hey, Leslie, you're just wrapping this show up, but that's okay. You can always catch it later on Facebook/Southern Horror Queen. Find yourself in Alabama. Here's 3, 4, 5 places for you to check out. A couple of urban legends, a lot of haunted madness, all kind of crazy stuff. And I have my friend Todd to thank for this because he was the one that pointed me in that direction. Susie also pointed me in a direction last week. I have not forgotten. I will get into that. I have everything written down somewhere. I just need to find it. And I'll do a little research on that place that you recommended as well. But in the meanwhile, happy 4th of July, creepy kids. Hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. Stay safe. Drink plenty. Don't drive. You might spill it. In the meanwhile, if you are having creepy DTs, you just need to see your creepy chick. You got to get your scary on, and it's nowhere near Tuesday. Go to authorlyngibson.com. You can check out my blog there. You can pick up my books there. There's all kind of crazy stuff, pictures from past events, pictures of the dragster, and a tab where you can stream The Edge Radio US Live, and that's where some of the most rockin' tunes are going down these days. Are you living on the edge? You're not if you're not streaming live. Get on there. Download the app to your phone, laptop, tablet, whatever it is that you stream on. Check out the madness at The Edge Radio US. All right, folks. You guys have a happy and safe 4th. And until next time, y'all keep it creepy, because you know that's what I'm going to do.